So it is a wonderful joy to be back with you this morning. We are the third week in our series, The Narrow Way. And so this morning, in fact, they're probably all going to be a little Aina. I have the great joy and privilege of doing one of the more Aina ones this morning. So we prepare our hearts for what the Lord will say to us. And we are in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, as we know, the Sermon on the Mount. And last week, Niels spoke on the passage where Jesus spoke of coming to fulfill the law. He said, I'm not coming to abolish it, but I've come to fulfill the law. And then he ends that section, Jesus, by saying, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not see the kingdom of God. Now, what you need to know about the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll see this particularly this morning, is that Jesus was using a bit of hyperbole. He was being a bit dramatic in order to make a point. Because his teaching, what he was teaching on that mountain side, was so radical. It's radical for us. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, you're pretty challenged. It's hard to read the Sermon on the Mount and go, yeah, no, I'm doing that. I'm okay, thank you, Lord. It's challenging. It's challenging for us. It was revolutionary for his listeners. They had grown up, and they were used to, remember these were Jewish listeners, they had grown up with the Pharisees, they had grown up with the law, they had grown up with a whole lot of other laws, they had grown up with the scribes and telling them what to do and how to behave and so on. And Jesus comes along and he says, I've come and I've fulfilled all of that. And he basically then gives them a new ethic, a new way to live in the kingdom where he is Lord. Where he is Lord. And so he basically, to those listeners, must have shattered their thinking, their preconceived ideas of life and religion and what it means to serve God and be obedient to God and all the rest. And yet, and there were many messiahs around, or self-proclaimed messiahs around in Jesus' time. There were many rabbis that went rogue and pronounced all sorts of things. And yet, at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, the very last verses of chapter 7, it says, and the people were amazed because he spoke with one who had authority. Isn't that interesting? So as challenging and revolutionary as this teaching was of Jesus, they recognized something. This wasn't just waffle. This wasn't like all the other prophets and self-proclaimed messiahs. There was something in what Jesus was saying that resonated in their hearts with great authority. Understand this. The word of the Lord will always come with authority. Sometimes is this me? Is this the Lord? The words of the Lord will always come with authority. They just do. And so the people, as revolutionary as this teaching was, they understood this. Something in their hearts went, yes. Something in their hearts went, yes, this is true. This is true. And so from Jesus then put it, unless your righteousness surpasses the other Pharisees, which obviously it can't, he introduces them now, not so subtly, quite dramatically, into a new way of thinking in his kingdom. What it means to follow Jesus, what it means to live in the kingdom, out of the old ways of Judaism, into a new kingdom. And what does it look like? And so we have a number of phrases now through from verse 21 right to the end of chapter 5. 6 statements, Jesus addressing 6 topics. And he basically starts saying, you have heard it said, I say to you. That's where Jesus is now shifting their thinking. You've heard it taught this way. You've heard it taught. You've heard it said. I say to you something quite different. I want you to think differently about these things that ultimately will lead to a different behavior. And so Jesus then, essentially, is now wanting to shift their thinking from you've heard it taught, you've heard it said, and it's, for the most part, he's referring back to the law, but not limited to that. He's also referring to some of the rabbinic teaching that had come down with the law that Jesus was now addressing. You've heard it said, I am saying to you, I am giving you a new way to consider this. Does that make sense? And he goes through 6 of these statements introduced by, you've heard it said, I say to you. We're not going to look at all of them, and we're just going to look at a few, and Kieran's going to tackle the same tonight We haven't compared notes, so you'll come from a slightly different angle looking at the same topic. Here's what it boils down to. Here's what it boils down to. Jesus was saying, in essence, it's not about the outward appearance, it's about your heart. What matters in the kingdom is not the outside, the externals. What matters in the kingdom, more than the externals, is your heart and the condition of your heart. In fact, it's always been that way. We know even from David's appointment, remember, as king. Man looks at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. It's always been that way. In Ezekiel 36:26, it was prophesied, I'll take away your heart of stone, I'll give you a heart of flesh, and I will cause you to follow my ways. I will put a new heart in you. Speaking of the transformation that will come within through Jesus Christ, right? So essentially what Jesus is saying, it's not about the outward externals. It's not about the coming to church. It's not about all the rituals and regulations that they had to do as good Jews, because that's what the Pharisees told them they needed to do in order to be right with God. It's not about the externals for us still today, the coming to church, the tithing, all the things that we do. But Jesus says what matters most is the condition of your heart. See, you and I can do a lot of things. You know, people go, oh, wow, God, Trev, just so spiritual. And yet my heart can be rotten. That's why Jesus, remember what Jesus called the Pharisees? You whitewashed tombs. Yeah. You whitewashed tombs. On the outside, all nice and clean, so it can look all shiny. But inside is a corpse. It's rotting. You're rotten on the inside. But outside, you look good. That's what Jesus said to the Pharisees. You can read it in Matthew 23. What Jesus is saying, what matters more than the outside, is what's on the inside. The condition of your heart. So let's jump into it. I told you it's going to be Aina. How's your heart? Right. Let's get into it. We're going to look at just 3, as I said, and just process something of the word for us this morning. So, verse 21, let's look at the first. In your Bibles, you'll have a subheading called murder. Jesus starts off tackling that. You've heard it said to the people long ago, do not murder. No complication there. It's in the 10 Commandments. So, very clear. Do not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I'll tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, raka, which is quite a word of contempt. It was a very derogatory word of the day. Will be answerable to Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother has something against you. Now, it's quite interesting that your brother has something against you. We often read it where we have something against our brother. It's not that, actually, although that would be relevant too. It's interesting that it even casts a wider scope, that if you remember that somebody has something against you, carry on worshiping as normal. No. It says, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother, then come and offer your gift. You see, it's not the external that matters as much as the heart. Does that make sense? Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him or on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and therefore the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I'll tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Speaking of what happens when we carry resentment in our hearts. In our hearts. See what Jesus was saying here? It's quite revolutionary. It's actually quite simple. What Jesus said, you've heard it said, do not murder. And you know, if we walk around, we go, well, I haven't committed murder. Yeah, I know I'm a bit hot on that, but I haven't murdered anybody. And we think that that's okay. Jesus, no. No. How's your heart? Because where you've got anger, and where you've got resentment, where you've got unforgiveness in your heart, that's the problem. In fact, that's the root of the problem. Because ultimately, if that's unchecked, can lead to things like murder. But you see, the Pharisees were going around going, well, I haven't committed murder, therefore I'm righteous. Tick. I'm not a murderer. And Jesus shifting everything, turning it all up on its head. So it's not about what you do or don't do. It's about the condition of your heart. And if there's anger in your heart, if there's resentment in your heart, that's the problem. That's the problem. We live in this world where we get hurt. We live in this world where we have our dreams and aspirations shattered by often other people. We get hurt, we get angry, we get offended, we upset. That's what really matters in the kingdom. The condition of your heart. You see, you can come to church week in, week out, raising your hands in worship, tithing in the offering basket, serving. Jesus, and those things are important. But what's more important is what's in your heart. You and I can hide that from people. We can be serving, we can be trying, we're looking righteous. But Jesus, that is of less concern than your heart. Does that make sense? Your heart matters. Yes, those things are important. Jesus never knocked attendance at the synagogue, church, tithing, all the externals of doing and serving. Never put that down. But if that's what you're doing at the expense of the condition of your heart, that's the problem. That is a problem. And that's what Jesus is putting his finger on. Does that make sense? And so it goes on then too. When you come to the altar, when you come to church, and you remember that you've had a fallout with someone, and they've still got something against you. Jesus says the first thing you should do, go and sort out with your brother first. Go and deal with that first. The heart. The heart. Go and make peace first. Then you come back and you bring your offering to the Lord. Then, the implication is, then the offering is acceptable before the Lord. And if you're upset with an adversary, settle that quickly. Make peace. Offer forgiveness. Receive that forgiveness. Deal with your heart. Deal with your heart. I remember one of the churches that I was growing up in, and this is not uncommon. I've heard this in many churches. There were two families that had a fallout. There were two families that had a fallout. I don't know what the fallout was. I was too young. There was a big fallout. Everybody knew about it. The one family sat over there, and the other family sat over there. In church, every Sunday. Every Sunday. I was too young to think, I just thought it was a bit of a joke. How is this? That adults can carry on like this. So along the line, offense was taken, something was said, they were upset with each other. So the one family over there and the other family over there, they left, at different exits in the building. Everybody spoke about it. Everybody knew about it. I realized, for me, it was just weird and strange that would happen in church. But you know what? It happens. It happens. It happens in plenty of churches. Individuals are not speaking to each other. Guys, church is the last place where that should be happening. Church is the last place where that should be happening. I'm doing my best. It's been a while. I'm a little rusty now. It's about the heart. It's about the heart. If you come and see me and you're angry at someone, what am I going to tell you? Go and sort it out. First sort out your heart before the Lord, and then you go and make peace. Does that make sense? Now it gets harder. It gets more anal. Let's read on. The second thing that Jesus addresses is adultery. Verse 27. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for the whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body be thrown into hell. I mean, Jesus is not mincing his words now, is he? I mean, this just got real. I mean, you can just imagine a pin dropping on the Sermon on the Mount. On the Mount. Did he say that? Yes, he did. So, here we go. So the second thing is, Jesus says, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery, which is also in the Ten Commandments. Yes? Nothing vague about that. Jesus says, you've heard it said that. Now, most of us go, murder? Absolutely not. I mean, you'd probably be in prison if you did, but murder not. Adultery? Most of us go, no, I think I've been faithful for the most part to my spouse. Jesus all of a sudden gets so real. He said, if you look lustfully at a woman, it works both ways, by the way, lustfully at a man, you've committed sin in your heart. Before you ever sinned with your body. In your heart. In your heart. Fortunately, for us who live in this modern age, we live in this sex-saturated society where temptation is so easy. Temptation so easy. And so we walk around and we go, well, I haven't committed adultery. On the outside, I haven't committed adultery, but I'm stuck watching porn. And Jesus says, that's a heart issue. That is a heart issue. I'm flirting with the person at work. My marriage isn't what it used to be. Jesus says, it's in the heart. Long before, you see, we can't hide behind, well, I've not done anything yet. Don't shoot me, Pastor, I haven't done anything yet. Jesus says, what's happening in your heart? That's what really matters. And if you don't deal with what's in your heart, chances are your body may well start to act on it one day. So we deal with our heart. So Jesus cuts right to the heart. How's the condition of your heart? And then Jesus goes on to say, so if your right eye causes you to sin, or your right hand causes you to sin, and again, he gets deliberately, what is the word, hyperbolic? Uses hyperbole, like this dramatic, cut it out, gouge it out. No, he's not advocating self-mutilation, obviously. But what Jesus is saying is, deal with it decisively. Deal with it decisively. What's interesting is that the word, in the King James Version, you'll see the word is stumbling block. If your eye, so we have it in the NIV translated, causes you to sin. In the King James, it's stumbling block. If your eye is a stumbling block, that leads you to sin. It comes from the Greek word scandalon, from where we get our word, English, scandal. So what do we say when we heard, oh, someone's had an affair? We say, oh, it's a scandal. It's scandalous. Don't we? Sorry, you're not used to my high-pitched voice. You know, really. Okay, so it's scandalous. Let's try that again. Still doing my best. So it's a scandal. It's a scandal. Interestingly, that is not what it means in the Greek. In the original language, the word scandalon is a bait, a trap. That's why it's better translated stumbling block. It's a bait that traps you, snares you into sin. And what we know about sin, it is always, first and foremost, destructive to the person sinning, and before it is destructive to anybody else. And that's why Jesus says, if this is scandalon, if this is causing you, if this is baiting you, if you got your eyes on that lady, you got that eyes on that guy, you're watching stuff that you shouldn't, and you're feeding the lust of the eye, the heart is being drawn, it is scandalon, it is a trap. It is the enemy luring you in for your own destruction. Ask anybody that's addicted to porn if they're happy about it, feeling on top of the world. No. It's destructive to the soul, and it's destructive to relationships around them. It's the very nature of sin. It's the very nature of sin. And scandalon, so it's not, ooh, this is happening, have you heard? No. It's a bait trap that the enemy sets to lure you away from the purposes of God and pull you in. And where does it start? In the heart. The battleground is the heart. The battleground is the heart. And Jesus says, have the attitude, don't literally guard your eye out, but deal with it decisively. It is so destructive. Understand this. Jesus is saying, sin is so destructive. Deal with it decisively as you need to. Now, some of us need to hear this. You know why? Because we live in this world, but I'm under grace. God's forgiven me. He understands. Sometimes I'm just weak and I fall. Guys, those are lies from the enemy. And we all battle with those little thoughts from time to time. But you're under grace and it's okay. And, God will forgive me. Yes, He will. He will. But it's destructive to you. God doesn't have a problem. He's made every provision to forgive you. It's not for God's benefit, it's for ours, that we deal decisively. Even for those, and Marcus facilitated the course Conquer a few times now, dealing with tools to work through addiction to pornography, because it's so rough, it is so available, so tempting. And what you will find is that it's really hard to break free on your own, as with all addictions. But if you have tools at your disposal, little things you could set on your phone, stuff like that you can do, checks and balances, buddy that is alerted and so on. You know what we do? No, I've got a handle on it. No, I'm okay. Thanks. No, I'm okay. Thanks for all the information. I'm okay. I'll handle it. Guys, what Jesus is saying, don't think that you're strong enough. Don't think that you're strong enough. Deal decisively. Find whatever help you need. Get that help, because you don't want to go down the road of sin. Do you understand? It's not gouging your eye out, but it is dealing decisively with what you need to do. And the Lord is there, but sometimes He's asking of us to do the decisive action. His strength is available, but when we go, no, I got it. I got a handle on it. I'm praying about it. Sometimes you're not strong enough. But God is waiting for you to take that decisive action. His resource and His power is available. But sometimes we've got to get serious. Does that make sense? Got real, eh? Very quickly. All right. So literally what Jesus is saying, cut it off. If you feel your heart going, giving in to sin, whatever, sexual or otherwise, cut it off. Deal with it decisively. And then number 3, we'll jump to the end, the last one, love your enemies, from verse 43. You have heard it said, there it is again, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Now that was not in the law. Love your enemy is, but over the time, rabbinic teaching had come to go, well, I know we've got to accommodate the foreigner, etc., but because of Israel's enemies and the hostility and fighting throughout the ages, the kind of rabbis had said, we love our brothers first. A fellow Jew, we love, but a non-Jew, we love, but just not as much as our fellow Jews. The word hate there is probably a bit strong. It's not like we hate, but the teaching of the rabbis had been, well, the other nations and others are not as worthy of love as your fellow Jew is. So, Jesus turns that on its head. He says, that's what you've heard, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons, listen to this, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Because what do good sons do? They reflect their Father's nature. What is their Father's nature? For God so loved the whole world. For God so loved everyone, including the ones that nailed Him to the cross, His Son to the cross. For God so loved, He gave His only Son. If we want to be sons of the Father, then it is reflected in the way that we love even the unlovable, even our enemies. He causes His Son to rise on the evil and the good that bothers us, and sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. Sometimes we don't like that so much, when evil prospers and so on. But that's God. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Of course they're going to love you because they need to collect the tax. And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Rather be perfect, therefore, as your Father, your Heavenly Father, is perfect. So love your enemies. Sadly, what's happened, particularly in our Western world, or our world that leans kind of west, where Christianity has flourished and over the last couple of 100 years, and is still kind of prevalent in society. A lot of Western society has been founded on somewhat Christian values and so on. Unfortunately, over the last few decades, there's been this kind of, as the church has lost its kind of place in society and retreated, so there's been a rise of those who are anti-church and sort of anti-Christian sentiments, who are now quite blatant and hostile towards Christianity. And the more that has happened, I'm just talking in our own society, it feels like the church has kind of retreated into a more defensive position. So it's us in our holy huddle against you, the world, that's coming after us. You know what happens when we get defensive? When you get cornered, what do? You get nasty because you feel threatened. And unfortunately, all too often the church has got nasty. We've spat back at the world and those that we do not agree with hostility and so on. And you can just see, if you just have a look, the church has not clothed itself in any sense of glory, let alone the love of Christ, dealing with some of the ills in our society, or some of the people that we as the church would deem to be, evil or wrong or sinful or so on. And so this like us and them mentality. You see what's playing out in America right now in terms of politics. And because the evangelical church, by and large, has sort of kind of supported the Republican Party and the Trump presidency. You hear Christianity being touted all over the place. And I heard this from a commentator speaking last week, saying it's almost like you can't be a Christian and a Democrat in America any longer. Do you know why? Because it's us and them. It's us and them. We're the Christians, but now you disagree with us. You're not part of us. And so we adopt this hostile position. You see it played out over and over and over again. It's hostile, us and them. What if we were more loving towards those that are not like us? Kinder and gracious. The gospel has always had the most credibility where it is passed on in love. I think sometimes we wrestle with this because we think, well, to be loving means we've got to compromise our principles. No, we don't. No, we don't. Look at Jesus. Jesus engaged a Samaritan woman. Samaritans were arch enemies of the Israelites and the Jews. He engaged a Roman centurion, a woman caught in adultery, a leper. Jesus just seemed to be able to love everybody that he encountered, regardless of their beliefs and practices and so on. Why? Because he carried the heart of love. He carried a heart of love. How poorly we do in comparison. How quickly we vilify our enemies. And we take this us and them approach. They said something nasty about my church, about my God. Come on, guys, are we so insecure? Are we so insecure? And I understand the notion. I've been a Christian long enough to know. We don't like people to use the Lord's name in vain. We don't like people to attack the church or Christianity or anything like that. But what if our posture was more loving, less judgmental, less hostile, more gracious, without compromising our principles? We're not doormats. Jesus certainly was a doormat. We're not saying that at all. How challenged were we by Philmon and his family last year? You heard firsthand of someone who was persecuted, thrown in prison, not for being a criminal, not for breaking the law, except for loving and following Jesus Christ, where that became a threat to the state. Not once did we hear him speaking bad of his leaders, but praying for them. For those who, his captors, threw him in prison, praying. And I imagine that's hard. We get defensive when somebody says something, our boss looks at us funny or chastises us at work. The arch enemy number one, they're off our prayer list. Come on. Are we not built for more than this? Did not Jesus die for more than this? And I'm not saying loving your enemies is easy. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. Jesus did. Commands us to do the same. Love your enemy. Isn't it amazing what happens when we do? You can please correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, in recent history, there was no other country that had such animosity similar to what we went through from apartheid to a democratic South Africa, that had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like we did, headed up by a member of the church. You can agree or disagree with Desmond Tutu, but he still came in with a message of love and forgiveness. Consider this. That absolution was given. You remember, you might have watched it on your television screens as was televised back in the late 90s, early 2000s. that if you would come forward and confess, you would be granted absolution. How radical is that? And yet thoroughly Christian. To my knowledge, no other country in the world has done that. It wasn't a nice ANC or a political concept. It was a Christian concept. It was a Christian concept. And I know that we have got a long way to go still as a nation, but there was healing that took place. There was some restoration and reconciliation that took place. A long way to go. Didn't solve all the ills, but it addressed something that needed to be addressing with love, forgiveness, and healing. How different our country may have been without love, a message of love and forgiveness that at its core are thoroughly Christian values. And so Jesus says, you've heard it said, love your enemies, that's love your own people, that's nice. Hate your enemies. Jesus says, no, we're called to love everyone, even those who persecute us. Pray for them. How's your prayer list? Does it contain people or institutions or that are hostile towards you personally or your faith? When was the last time you prayed for a Muslim nation? Or your Muslim boss? That you would come to Christ? When was the last time we prayed for Julius Malema? Imagine if you got saved. Imagine if you got saved. When was the last time you prayed for more for our government than you criticized it? How's your heart? See, this is what Jesus was getting at. We've just touched on 3. Not sure if Kieran will touch on some of the others tonight, but 6 statements. You've heard it said. I'm giving you a different way. And all of it is about your heart. It's about your heart. Question is, how's your heart? Not what you do, not what happens on the outside, not what you haven't done. I didn't commit murder, I haven't committed adultery, I haven't done this. I haven't even punched somebody recently. How's our heart?